Hey everyone, welcome back. You ever get that feeling like your brain just won't stop? Like it's stuck replaying all those embarrassing moments or maybe catastrophizing every possible future scenario? Yeah, that's overthinking, and I think we can all relate to that feeling a little too much. Today we're going to try and tame that overthinking monster. We'll be diving into a YouTube video called Learning English Podcast, How to Stop Overthinking. And they've got some really interesting ways of explaining this whole overthinking thing. So get ready to have your mind blown.
It's funny, right? How we try to tell ourselves that all that overthinking is actually productive. Like if we just worry about something enough, we'll magically solve the problem.
Totally. It's
Yeah.
like we're fighting anxiety with more anxiety. And spoiler alert,
Yeah.
that never works. But this video, it starts off with this awesome analogy about a kite. And you know what? I think it really captures why overthinking is so counterproductive.
Exactly. Imagine a kite soaring up in the sky, no problem. Our thoughts can be like that too, just free, helping us see things from different angles.
Mhm.
But then when we overthink, it's like we're yanking on that kite string way too hard. And instead of flying high, it gets all tangled up and crashes down.
Yeah, oh, yeah. That's a powerful image. It makes you think, what is it about our brains that make them so prone to those overthinking crashes?
Yeah.
We all know the amygdala, that fear center of the brain, plays a big role. But I wonder if there's some cognitive biases at work here, too.
Oh, definitely. There's this one called confirmation bias, where we look for information that backs up what we already believe, even if what we believe is kind of negative or scary.
Oh, interesting.
So let's say you're already worried about something. You're more likely to notice and remember stuff that feeds into that worry, which just makes the overthinking even worse.
Wow. So it's like our brains are working against us. And, the video introduces us to this college student, Emma. She's dealing with major exam anxiety, and her story really shows how overthinking can actually make it harder to prepare and do well.
For sure. Emma's so focused on those what ifs, like, what if she forgets everything? What if the exam is way too hard? But because of that, she's not using her energy in a helpful way. It's not even about being ready for the exam anymore. It's just pure anxiety taking over.
Right, she's creating problems that weren't even there to begin with. And that makes me think about how overthinking messes with our decision making, too. We get so paralyzed by analyzing every single outcome that we end up not making any decision at all. Or even worse, we rush into a bad decision just to get away from all the mental chaos.
You hit the nail on the head. Overthinking doesn't just cause anxiety, it can lead to some seriously bad choices. We might miss out on great opportunities, keep second guessing ourselves, or even sabotage our own success.
Yeah, it's like being stuck in mental gridlock.
Hmm.
But the video, it offers this other great metaphor for how to escape the overthinking trap. And get this, it's learning to surf. I'm intrigued. How does surfing relate to taming our thoughts?
Okay, so picture your mind as this vast ocean, right? And your thoughts, those are the waves. Now, overthinking, that's like trying to fight against the current, trying desperately to stop those waves from coming in. But we all know you can't control the waves, right? So instead, we learn to ride them.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So instead of resisting our thoughts, we kind of just acknowledge them, observe them, but we don't let them pull us under.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's all about creating space between a thought and how we react to it. The video talks about Stella, this young professional who used to overthink every interaction at work. Like she'd leave meetings and replay every word she said, wondering if she messed up or if her boss thought she was incompetent. It's pretty common, especially in those high pressure jobs.
Oh, I've been there. I totally get that. Overanalyzing every email, every conversation, wondering if I came across the right way. So did Stella find a way to handle all that self-doubt?
She did. She realized she was wasting so much energy fighting a current she couldn't control. So she started practicing just acknowledging those waves of self doubt when they popped up, reminding herself that they were just thoughts, not facts.
That's an interesting approach. It reminds me of mindfulness, where you just observe your thoughts without judging them.
Yeah,
But I imagine it takes a lot of practice to get that kind of mental distance.
absolutely. It's not about shoving those thoughts down, it's about changing how we relate to them. And that leads us to another point the video makes how overthinking can disguise itself as carefulness. We tell ourselves we're just being thorough, but really we're stuck on this hamster wheel of indecision.
Oh man, tell me about it. It's like you convince yourself you just need to think about it a little bit longer, analyze it from every angle, and then finally you'll have the clarity to make the perfect decision. But the more you think, the more confused you get.
Yeah, it's the overthinking paradox. We want certainty, but trying to find it by overanalyzing just leads to more uncertainty and anxiety.
So true. And the video uses this example of James, an entrepreneur who's struggling with a big business decision. His story really shows how this overthinking trap can lead to, as they call it, paralysis by analysis.
Exactly. Jays was making lists, weighing pros and cons, coming up with backup plans for every possible scenario. But the more he thought about it, the more stuck he felt. Instead of getting clear, he just got trapped in that cycle of overanalyzing everything.
It's like that sinking feeling of being stuck in quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you
Yeah.
go. Have you ever felt that? Like the answer is to think more, but it just makes everything worse.
I think we've all been there at some point. And a big takeaway from James's story and from the video overall is that sometimes taking action, even if it's not perfect, is way better than just ruminating endlessly.
That's a good reminder.
hmm
It's so easy to get caught up in trying to make the absolute perfect decision. But sometimes you just got to trust your gut and take that first step.
You're right. And that brings us to the big question. Why do we overthink in the first place?
Well, based on what we've talked about so far, I'd say it comes down to wanting control. Like, we're trying to predict every possible outcome so we don't get blindsided by something bad, or so we can avoid making mistakes.
That's a really sharp observation. And the video actually comes right out and says the root of overthinking is fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of the unknown.
Huh.
We overthink because we think it'll somehow protect us from all that scary stuff.
But the ironic thing is, it probably just makes those fears even stronger, right? Like, we're shining a spotlight on our anxieties, making them seem bigger in our minds.
Exactly. Overthinking doesn't shield us from fear, it amplifies it. It's like trying to stay dry in a rainstorm using a colander.
Haha, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So if the key is to let go of that need to control everything, how do we actually do that? I mean, that sounds pretty tough, especially when our brains are wired to worry.
Well, the video has some helpful visuals for that. Imagine a jar of muddy water. If you keep shaking it up, the water stays all cloudy and murky. But if you just let it sit, the dirt settles and the water clears up.
Oh, I like that one. So our minds are like the muddy water and overthinking is the shaking. Just pausing, letting things settle. That's how we get clarity.
Does the video give any other practical tips for finding that stillness?
It does. And they bring up another really important point, especially these days, social media.
Ugh, social media. Does it ever not make overthinking 1,000 times worse?
Well, the video definitely acknowledges that reality. It talks about how social media throws all these comparisons at us constantly. Other people's highlight reels, these perfectly curated versions of their lives.
It's like we're always comparing our everyday struggles to everyone else's filtered vacation photos. It's a recipe for feeling inadequate and anxious.
They share a story about Rachel, who found herself scrolling before bed all the time, and it always left her feeling anxious and not good enough. It's a pretty common experience in our super connected world. Yeah, I think we've all been Rachel at some point, so what's the solution? Delete all social media.
Well, that might work for some people, but the video really focuses on being mindful about how we use social media, setting boundaries, limiting screen time, and remembering that what we see online is often a very distorted version of reality.
That's such a good reminder. It's easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves and forget that most people are only showing their best selves online. So we've talked about the problem, the root causes, and some of the challenges. But I'm really curious to hear more about the practical solutions this video offers. What are some concrete steps we can take to start taming that overthinking monster?
Well, the video really emphasizes starting small.
Okay, I like that. Small steps, baby steps. It
Yeah.
feels less overwhelming. So what kind of small steps are we talking about here?
Think about those times when you feel your mind racing. Could be anything, right? Work deadlines, relationship stuff, even something embarrassing you said like weeks ago. What's the first thing you can do to kind of interrupt that spiral?
Well, my instinct would be to grab my phone and just scroll endlessly. But knowing that's not helpful, maybe taking a few deep breaths.
Exactly. It sounds so simple, but it's really powerful. Taking those deep, conscious breaths, it actually tells your nervous system that you're safe. It can help calm down that fight or flight response that often drives overthinking.
Yeah, it's like hitting the pause button on all that anxiety. And speaking of focusing, the video also talks about the importance of supple tasking, right?
Yes. Our culture is all about multitasking, but honestly, our brains just aren't built for it. When we try to juggle too many things at once, we end up feeling scattered and stressed. And in the end, we're actually less effective.
I've totally noticed that when I try to do too much at once, my brain goes into overdrive and I get less done than if I just focus on one thing at a time. So breathe, focus. What other practical tips does the video suggest?
Another big one is challenging your thoughts. It's like becoming a detective for your own anxiety. Remember Emma worrying about failing that exam?
Oh yeah, those what if spirals can be so convincing, even when they make no sense.
Exactly. So instead of getting swept away, you pause and ask yourself, is this thought helpful? Is it even true? Is there any real evidence to back up this fear, or am I just catastrophizing?
It's like we're fact checking our anxieties,
Uh-huh.
seeing if they actually hold up under scrutiny.
And often when we do that, we realize those fears are based on assumptions and distorted thinking. Speaking of things we can actually control, the video also talks about shifting our focus, right?
Yeah, that's huge. I know when I'm stuck in overthinking mode, it's often about stuff I can't do anything about, like
Right.
worrying about what other people think of me or trying to predict the future.
It's so easy to fall into those traps. But the reality is, we can't control other people's thoughts or actions, and we definitely can't predict the future. What we can control are our own actions, our responses, our mindset.
It's about recognizing that circle of influence, focusing our energy on what we can actually impact. And that brings us to what might be the most powerful tip of all: gratitude.
Ah, yes. Gratitude. It's like a secret weapon against overthinking. The video suggests taking a few minutes each day to really think about the things you're grateful for.
It's such a simple practice, but it can totally change your perspective. Instead of dwelling on what's wrong or what's missing, gratitude helps us appreciate what we already have.
And there's actually a lot of research in positive psychology that supports this. Studies show that practicing gratitude can actually change our brains, making us more resilient to stress and more likely to experience positive emotions.
That's incredible. It's like we're training our brains to focus on the good stuff instead of getting stuck in negativity. So we've got these practical tools: breathing, single tasking, challenging our thoughts, focusing on what we can control, and gratitude. They all seem pretty doable. But I'm curious, does the video give any examples of how to apply these tools in real life?
They do. They really emphasize the importance of making these techniques part of your routine. It's not about trying to do everything at once. Pick one or two things that resonate with you and start practicing them consistently.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like building a muscle. The more we practice these overthinking busting techniques, the stronger our mental fitness becomes.
Right. And they also talk about being kind to yourself. It's okay to have those overthinking moments. We all do. The key is to notice them, acknowledge them, and gently guide ourselves back to the present moment using the tools we've talked about.
I love that. It's not about beating ourselves up for overthinking. It's about being understanding with ourselves as we navigate this crazy world. I'm a bit of a word nerd, so I always love when podcasts sneak in some vocabulary lessons. Did any words or phrases from the video stand out to you?
Oh, for sure. They use the word tangle a lot, which perfectly describes that feeling of our thoughts getting all knotted up and confused. They also talk about how our thoughts can spiral, getting more and more intense and negative.
Ugh, yeah, those thought spirals are the worst.
Mhm.
One worry leads to another, and suddenly you're down this rabbit hole of anxiety.
Exactly. And they use the word dwell, which means to kind of linger on something, especially something negative, like dwelling on past mistakes or worrying about potential problems that might not even happen.
It's like we're stuck replaying all the things we wish we'd done differently or all the worst case scenarios. And of course, they use the word anxiety a lot, which is that feeling of worry, nervousness, and unease.
But what's interesting is they also use the word profound, which means deep and meaningful.
Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't normally connect profound with overthinking. How do they use it in this context?
Well, they suggest that even though overthinking can be a struggle, it can also be a sign that we're trying to make sense of things, that we're searching for a deeper meaning.
Hmm, that's a good point. Maybe overthinking at its core is just our brains trying to figure things out, trying to make the world feel a little less unpredictable.
Maybe. And then, of course, there's the word overthinking itself. They use it in a way that emphasizes how pointless it is. Like it's not a solution, it's a trap.
Right. And they use that great image of the hamster wheel to illustrate that,
Yep.
running and running, but going nowhere.
Exactly.
So we've explored the problem, the root causes, and some powerful solutions. But, the video also mentions that our brains are constantly bombarded with information in this digital age. And all this information overload can make our tendency to overthink even worse.
Right. It's like our minds are being pulled in a million directions, makes it even harder to find that stillness and clarity.
Exactly. And that brings up a really important question. How could we create more mental space in our lives amidst all the noise and distraction? That stillness that lets the muddy water settle, like we were talking about earlier.
It's a great question. It's almost like we need to declutter our minds the same way we declutter our homes. Maybe it's about setting boundaries with technology, creating intentional periods of quiet and disconnection.
Or maybe incorporating mindfulness practices into our daily routines, like taking a few minutes each morning to meditate or practice gratitude. Or even just being more present during everyday activities, like eating or walking.
Yeah, it's about finding those pockets of peace in the middle of all the chaos. Remembering to breathe, to pause, to appreciate the simple things. That's what allows us to step off that hamster wheel of worry and reconnect with that inner calm.
Yeah, it's like hitting a reset button on our brains, giving ourselves permission to just be, without all that pressure to do more, think more, achieve more.
I think you put that perfectly. It's about taking back control of our attention and deciding where we want to focus our energy. Instead of letting worries and distractions take over, we can consciously choose to cultivate a sense of presence and peace.
And that reminds me of something else from the video. They mentioned how overthinking can sometimes come from this fear of missing out. FOMO, as they call it.
Oh, absolutely. FOMO is a huge factor in overthinking, especially with social media being everywhere. We see all these images and stories of other people living these amazing lives, and it's easy to start comparing ourselves and feeling like we're not good enough.
It's like we're stuck in this constant game of keeping up with the Joneses. But the Joneses are now everyone we follow online.
Exactly. And the thing is, social media often shows us a very curated and distorted view of reality. People usually share their best moments, their successes, those picture perfect vacations, but we don't see the struggles, the setbacks, the everyday stuff that makes up a real life.
It's like we're comparing our behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. No wonder we end up feeling inadequate and anxious.
So, how do we escape this FOMO fueled overthinking trap?
Well, it sounds like it takes a mix of mindfulness, self-awareness, and maybe a little digital detox.
You're getting it. Mindfulness helps us notice when we're getting sucked into the comparison game. Self awareness lets us recognize those triggers that set off our overthinking spirals. And yeah, sometimes a little break from technology can be really helpful to create some space and reclaim our attention.
It's like giving our brains a much-needed vacation from all the constant stimulation.
And in those quiet moments, we might just realize that we already have everything we need to be happy and fulfilled.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into taming the overthinking monster, what are some key things you'd like our listeners to remember?
I think the most important message is this: we are not our thoughts. Our thoughts are just things that happen in our minds, and we have the power to choose how we respond to them.
We can either get caught up in those overthinking spirals, or we can choose to notice them, observe them, and gently guide ourselves back to the present moment.
Exactly. And remember, it's a process, not about being perfect. There will be times when we fall back into those old patterns of overthinking. But with a little self-compassion and consistent effort, we can build a more peaceful and empowered relationship with our minds.
It's like we're learning to surf those waves of thought, riding them with skill and grace.
That's a great way to put it.
So until next time, keep practicing those overthinking busting techniques. Remember to breathe, focus, challenge your thoughts, and cultivate gratitude. And above all, remember that you are capable of taming that overthinking monster and creating a more peaceful and fulfilling life for yourself. Thanks for joining us.